Hi, and welcome to another series of the Melissa Roberts Foundation online training modules. My name is Bruce Roberts, and I'm the chair of the Melissa Roberts Foundation. Today, we're going to talk about some of the tools that exist around being able to support people with lived experience of hearing voices. Voice profiling is it's a simple tool, but it's a very, very effective tool to gain a better understanding of the voice hearing experience, whether you're a voice hearer or whether you're somebody with who works clinically or whatever, or in a support role for someone with voices. So we find this particular tool to be very, very successful and very prominent being used out there to help build an understanding of the experience, but more importantly, as a stepping stone to moving forward with understanding the experience greater. And it allows us then to move to focusing, which once we take that profile, we can then use the focus questions and look at the people's circumstances in a more specific way once we have that profile as a snapshot. This is video 4, or module 4 of the 7 videos in the Hearing Voices series. And again, it's one of the tools that people can work with in the situation of supporting people with lived experience. Let's look at the process chart for when we start. The first thing you need to do if you're going to be looking at working with somebody and delving into their history and their background, it goes without saying you have to be able to establish a relationship with that individual. We would not support people entering into a process where they would be looking to do a voice profiling exercise if they have little or no prior working relationship with a particular client. It could take weeks, months, or whatever for you to gain that trust and consent of that individual to be able to move forward. So you need to be very careful about when you attempt to use any of these tools. So establishing a relationship is very important. That would be normally happening in the startling stage, when that person is now starting to look at circumstances where they are looking for support and looking for treatment for their associated issues like anxiety and stress. It's very important that you are able to support them in that and establish a relationship. A support plan then comes into place and agreed with the person that you're working with. And then you can look at moving into what we have as an introductory questionnaire around the experience. Now, the introductory questionnaire that we use is a standard document. It's very short amount of questions. It's not highly intrusive, but for somebody who's stuck in the startling stage or someone who's not really keen to talk about their voices historically, it can be a bit disturbing. So again, you have to be able to establish a strong relationship. You have to be trustworthy in their eyes for them to be able to share probably some information that they've never shared with anyone before. From that introductory questionnaire, it's been designed in a way that you can then develop a basic profile, and that generally comes out in the organisational stage. So the introductory questionnaire and the basic profile is done at a point of time when the person's more relaxed or comfortable in talking about their relationship. You can't do those things while people are stuck in that stage 1, in the startling stage. People just won't disclose. They won't be prepared to come forward. They're not ready for that process. What is voice profiling? Well, it looks at the voices and how they influence the individual, how they influence the voice hearer. And the purpose of the profiling is to make it clear to yourself as the voice hearer and others what exactly are the natures of your experiences and how they influence your life. You need to try and identify who the voices are and how they affect. If you do not know who the voices are, give it a title, maybe one that sums it up. It's very important that the voices have an identity. It's not good to talk about that voice or this voice or voice 1 or voice 2. You have to be able to put an identity to that voice. Now, even if the voice doesn't have a name in the normal sense, as it says, give it some sort of a title. What we found is with people giving it a title or some sort of description, generally when you start peeling back the layers and looking at their life history, we find that title or description that they've given it has some correlation with their life history. So it can't be dismissed as being just an oddity or a nomination of something just to fill a gap. It generally has some significant meaning, but it's important that you have that title so that you've got an entity to relate to, because the voices are real, the voices belong to the voice hearer, and it's part of their acceptance process to enable to do that. A voice profile is a representation of who your significant voices are and how they affect you. Helps in 2 ways. If a person wants to help, they can see from profiles that the real problems are and when you need them most. Remember, profiles can change over time. For many people, there are many voices Only one or two of them are usually problematic. So sometimes the other voices can be helpful. And we've talked about that in previous videos and modules about people can have different voices, voices that are adaptive and supportive, or voices that are derogatory. They can have both, or they can have one or the other. Now, what we have to understand about profiles is that a profile is a very concise and succinct set of data facts. It is not a report, it's not a narrative, and it's not open to interpretation. It has to be taken in the literal sense of how it's presented. You have to take it, and if you're actually taking a person through a process of determining, answering the introductory questions, which we'll look at in a minute, you have to look at them literally. You can't add your own interpretation to them. And it's very important that when you do that exercise and when you finish it, you go back and walk over the questions a number of times with the person concerned, with the voice hearer, and make sure that they're happy that the answers and things that you have written down are exactly what they believe the circumstances to be. That's very important. They have to take ownership, but you also have to have a very concise set of data facts to work from. Any departure from that can dilute the benefits. So when we talk about critical voices, we talk about voices being messengers, and we talk about voices having important messages that you need to work out what they are. So what you need to do though is look at a situation where the voices don't always talk in a literal sense. They talk metaphorically. So it's about peeling back the layers and decoding those messages. So what we say is, look beyond the metaphor, but don't shoot the messenger. A lot of the messages you get may sound like they are being highly critical and aggressive, but there's a reason for it. You need to be able to determine what that reason is. It's not easy, but when you get into the organisational stage and you're prepared to share those experiences, it can become more obvious. The critical voice is extremely anxious, almost desperate for the person to succeed in the world and to be accepted and liked by others. So what we're saying is the critical voice is there to try and protect. But it'll be critical of people that you associate with. It'll be critical of you if you don't do the things that it believes you need to do to move forward with your recovery. The critical voice does not know when enough is enough. It has a tendency to grow until it is out of control and begins to undermine and do the real damage. At this point, its original intent is lost. So what are we saying there? What we're saying is that voices, like anything in life, if you have a child who is trying to get their mother's attention, they'll say, "Mum, Mum, Mum, Mum," and they'll keep getting louder and louder and louder because Mum won't hear them. It's very similar with a critical voice. Often what we find is people who are stuck in stage one, in the startling stage, aren't responsive to the voice's messages. In fact, they're trying to do this, and as we know, they've got to embrace them. So what happens? The voices get louder, louder, more angry, more distressed, to a point where the original intent of being helpful has been blown apart, and now they're just yelling and screaming and getting more aggressive, and their original intent is lost. And that's why we find that people that are stuck in stage one for long extended periods of time, it's very difficult to shift them away from that because the voices potentially have got out of control. So reeling them in is not as simple. So we need to be able to have those conversations and understand what the messages are. So when we interpret a critical voice, how do we do that? Well, a message to die could also mean a part of the person needs to die off. In other words, change is needed. When voices say that you need to harm or in fact kill yourself, you need to look at it from metaphoric perspective. They're not actually telling you to end your life. They're telling you need to change the life you're living. You need to do something different in your life to move forward. A message to kill or hurt others also means suppressed anger about life experience. People who have been bullied or alienated or loneliness. The person has felt betrayed in the past and the voices are trying to protect the person from being hurt again. That tends to be the situation. So they're the metaphoric definitions that you can look at, in terms of those most dramatic messages that a lot of voice hearers get. A message to die or a message to kill someone else often are associated with support in that situation. So you need to be able to decode those messages. So when we talk about focusing on your voices, unless you know what your voices are and what they are saying, it's hard to understand and control them. Well, we know that. People who hide or run from their voices end up with no peace. Focusing on voices has been shown for some people to reduce the frequency of and distress caused when people hear voices. This approach works best for people who can attribute elements of their voices to how they feel about themselves. We often know that people whose voices say, "You're horrible, you're lousy, you're fat, you're ugly, you're useless, you're worthless." they're just reiterating the way that person feels about themselves, and they're just reinforcing it. It's about how they gain power. They know what triggers the person, so they push it down that situation. So often they're just reiterating how the person feels about themselves. Focusing, look at your experience today, and by knowing more about that, things can be less frightening, and your power over your voices can be increased. The power over the voices, that shift in the balance can be increased. So we're going to have a quick look at Sue, and just do a little bit of a case study on what that might look like. Now, Sue's 21 years old. And childhood was stressful for Sue, with her parents always arguing about lack of money. Sue felt safe at school and in the streets, but not at home, as she was bullied by her brother and her parents never intervened. Sue was yelled at as a child for going to see a friend her parents did not like, due to her friend's sister being a drug addict. When Sue was 16, she had a huge argument with her parents and left home. Now bear in mind, Sue's 21. When Sue was 16, she had a huge argument with her parents and left home. Sue had not had any contact with her parents since that day. Sue began hearing voices shortly after she left home. So there we have the direct link between what we consider a traumatic event, which is an argument with her parents and leaving home, and the onset of the voices. So that's, again, very common. So let's look at Sue's support plan. The questions: getting through right now. Well, I keep busy walking. How do you make your situation safe? Taking time out, talking to Claire and Joe, who are caseworkers, and friends that I trust. Things to lift or calm your mood: reading poetry, listening to classical music. Things to distract you: watching films, grooming my dog. People to support you: again, Claire and Joe and the Hearing Voices group members. So this particular person is a member of the Hearing Voices. List of who you can talk to if you are distressed: Peter B, who happens to be a consultant, and the Hearing Voices group. Emergency professional support, again, Peter B and CPN. So just a snapshot of her support plan. Then there's the background information. She's Sue Mitchell, she's 21, she's female, she lives in a rented house where she feels safe, she's not employed. Why are you in a psychiatric service? Because they've been told that I have schizophrenia, and here we have a situation where people live their label because that's what they understand. Who are you? She doesn't know. Who's your biggest fear? People in authority. When did that fear start? When I was aged 11? And have you been able to deal with those fears? No. Again, this is the onset. We'd like to ask Sue some questions about her experiences of hearing voices so we can understand them. And as we go through these questions and we're talking to Sue, keep asking you if you're okay to continue. Very important in the process that it becomes non-clinical, because you have to understand that you're really delving into intrusive areas of this person's life, things that they may not have disclosed to anyone else before. You have to be very empathetic and sensitive to those things. If you're doing it in a clinical environment, you may not get the answers that you want. Understanding who a social network is also important. Dad know about the voices? Yes, he does. Does Dad talk about the voices? No, he doesn't. Does Mum? Yes and no. The brother? Yes and no. Her Peter Bullimore, who is a support consultant, yes, he does. He knows about the voices, and you're happy to talk about the voices, as is the group, as is Joe, and as is Claire. So clearly the family hears voices, but they don't have conversations about it at all. So then we look at the standard template we use for finding and coming up with a voice profile. These 12 questions are the same in every situation. Answers obviously are different, but the questions are the same no matter who we're doing them for. They're a template that's been developed by people who are professionals who work specifically with voice hearers, but more importantly, been developed by voice hearers themselves who have recovered. How many voices do you hear? And Sue hears 2 voices. Do you have a name for your voices? Yes, Mum and Dad. Is there a reason that you chose them? Well, they sound like my mum and dad. How do you hear your voices? In other words, in what capacity? Well, Sue hears them inside her head. How do the voices make you feel? They make me feel bad and sad. What do you do in response? She often shuts herself away and cries, so isolation becomes an issue, as it does in most cases. What do your voices say? Her voices say critical things and challenge her existence. Has anyone said this to you in the past? Yes, her mum and dad. So what is your explanation for your voices? Because she feels bad, she feels that she's a bad person. And we hear that very often. Why do you think you hear voices? I feel voices because I'm a bad person. So this is not an uncommon response from people, even in their tormented situation. Can you communicate with the voices? No, she cannot. So she's got no explanatory framework. Obviously, she's stuck in stage 1. How do your voices respond? They shout more if I try to say anything. How do you cope? I watch TV or walk the dog, or I talk to my friends Joe and Claire. So there's your 12 questions that we've put forward, and there's some simple answers. So from that, we're able to develop a very basic and simple profile. Sue's profile looks like this. Sue's age 21. She hears 2 voices. She knows who they are. One's a male and one's a female. She hears them in her head. They shout and make her feel bad and sad. They can cause her to isolate herself. She knows what they say. She feels that she's a bad person. She can't communicate with them. They get angry when she tries, but she does have some positive coping strategies. So there it is in a nutshell. Again, very concise, very succinct, not open to interpretation, just a data capture of facts from Sue. Now that seems very simple, but it's very powerful because it gives us then the opportunity to design a set of focused questions around Sue's experience based on what she's told us about her voices. When we get to a process now, we have a basic profile. We've done the established relationship with the support plan, the questionnaire, and the profile's been developed. We're still in the organisational stage, so we can now look at focused questions and then designing some sort of report to move forward. So let's look at Sue's focus questions. Obviously, these questions will vary depending on her initial responses. Me being the consultant, the person actually conducting the interview. So there are two voices. You describe as mum and dad. Are they your biological parents? Yes, they are. They shout at you and this makes you feel bad and sad. Can you tell me what they say? At times you wish you had never been born. Do you hear this constantly? Yes. Do you believe what they're saying is true? Yes, because they said it. Can you tell me when they said it? They told me when I was 16 years old. Do you know why? Yes. I stopped out until 4 a.m. with my new boyfriend and not told them where I was. Do your parents love you? Yes. Could they have been totally worried or really worried? Oh, I guess so. Did you ever apologise to them? No. Your parents said at times you wish you had never been born, not we wish you had never been born. Would you have been angry if you had been in their situation? Well, I guess so. I would have grounded a child of mine if they had stayed out that late. Do you think you are feeling guilty still for not apologising? And here's the crunch. I do feel guilty. Do you think the voices might be trying to help you with your guilt? It makes sense. So what we have here is a shift where now that Sue is realising or recognising the fact that all this screaming and yelling and that the voices are actually doing are actually trying to be helpful, or possibly trying to be helpful. And that's a major shift for the clinician and for her in having an understanding that when you look at these very simple questions developed out of a very simple profile, you can get a very clear picture in a very short period of time. So it's very important. We found that tool is very, very useful to, again, clinicians, but it's also very useful for people with lived experience. Often being able to reiterate on a regular basis the key of facts about their life experience and their voice experience is difficult. So having that in a snapshot, and it's also a fluid document. Sometimes those situations may change as they progress through their 3 stages of voice hearing. Their relationship with the voices, their ability to communicate, for example, the answers to those questions may shift. So it's an ongoing tool. But it's a very, very effective tool as a very good platform to work for, to move into focus questions and start to design some sort of a recovery plan for someone with lived experience. We're finding clinicians these days are using it quite openly and widely to help move forward. So that's the end of voice profile and focusing. Again, a very useful tool for voice hearers and clinicians. The next module that we're going to look at is another tool, which is a much more intense and in-depth one called the Maastricht interview approach for voices. Hopefully none of that has been disturbing, but if you've been disturbed in any way by any of this content, please look at your options. Lifeline here in Australia is an option, 131114. Obviously, or your mental health practitioner, a family member or friend, if you're feeling a bit disturbed after watching this video. If you're in another country, of course, you'll have to look at your own options in that regard. Thanks very much for tuning in on this particular module. And again, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for being with us, and bye for now.